There are moments in life that divide everything into before and after. Moments so profound that they fundamentally alter who you are and how you see the world. For me, that moment came on a rainy Thursday afternoon in downtown Seattle, standing in the pristine dressing room of Nordstrom's bridal salon, holding a lavender bridesmaid dress that cost more than my monthly rent. The fabric was exquisite, imported silk that caught the light like water, and I was mentally calculating how many double shifts I would need to work to afford it when I heard Rebecca's voice floating through the thin partition that separated the dressing area from the comfortable lounge where she held court with her other bridesmaids. Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow, each one carefully chosen to wound. She was describing me to her friends, but the person she portrayed was unrecognizable. In her telling, I was a charity case she had taken under her wing, a farm girl she was trying to civilize. Someone whose presence at her wedding was more about Rebecca's magnanimity than our supposed friendship. The casual cruelty in her voice, the amusement of her audience, the way they laughed at her impression of my accent that I had worked so hard to lose, it all combined to create a moment of clarity so sharp it took my breath away. I stood frozen in that dressing room, the expensive dress suddenly feeling like it was made of lead, weighing me down. My reflection in the triple mirrors showed a woman trying desperately to fit into a world that would never truly accept her. The soft lighting that was designed to flatter instead seemed to highlight every sign that I didn't belong here, from my drugstore makeup to my nervously bitten nails. I carefully hung the dress back on its padded hanger, smoothing the fabric with hands that trembled slightly, and walked out of the dressing room with my head held high, even as my heart shattered with each step. Rebecca was so engrossed in her performance, so delighted by the laughter of her audience that she didn't even notice me leave. I walked past her little circle, past the champagne flutes and designer handbags, past the sales associate who looked at me with poorly concealed pity, and out into the Seattle rain. I didn't have an umbrella, had never gotten into the habit of carrying one despite living in the Pacific Northwest for over a decade, and the rain soaked through my jacket within minutes. But I welcomed it. Welcomed the cold and the wet that matched the storm inside me. That night, I sat in my small apartment in Capitol Hill, the one Rebecca had once described as charmingly bohemian when what she really meant was cheap and cramped. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor practicing violin, the haunting melody a perfect soundtrack to my misery. I looked around at my carefully curated space, at the thrift store finds I had painted and repaired, at the houseplants I had nurtured from clearance rack near death, at the vision board where I had optimistically planned my future. Everything suddenly seemed shabby and pathetic through the lens of Rebecca's contempt. We had been friends for 12 years, ever since that first day of freshman year at the University of Washington. I still remembered walking into our shared dorm room, my arms full of secondhand textbooks and discount bedding, to find Rebecca already there, her side of the room looking like a Pottery Barn catalog. She had turned from arranging fresh flowers in a crystal vase, something I had never seen anyone our age do, and smiled at me with what seemed like genuine warmth. That smile had been my undoing. In those early days, our friendship had felt like a fairy tale. Rebecca introduced me to a world I had only glimpsed in movies and magazines. She taught me about wine, not just that red went with meat and white with fish, but about tannins and terroir and how to hold the glass properly. She showed me how to navigate 5-course dinners, working from the outside in with the silverware, keeping my napkin in my lap, making appropriate small talk between courses. She took me shopping, teaching me about quality over quantity, about investment pieces and classic styles that would transcend seasons. I had been so grateful, so eager to learn, so desperate to leave behind the girl who had grown up in a double-wide trailer in Yakima, whose mother cleaned houses and whose father had died in a farming accident when I was 10. I threw myself into becoming someone new, someone better, someone worthy of Rebecca's friendship. I studied the way she moved, the way she spoke, the casual confidence with which she navigated the world. I practiced in front of my mirror, softening my vowels, eliminating the rural twang that marked me as an outsider. Looking back now with the clarity that only distance and pain can provide, I can see all the warning signs I missed or willfully ignored. The way Rebecca always insisted on paying for everything, not out of generosity, but because it reinforced the power dynamic between us. How she would introduce me at parties with little biographical details that seemed friendly but were actually designed to remind everyone of our different stations. "This is Emma," she would say. "She's on scholarship," or "Emma grew up on a farm, can you believe it?" As if my background was a quirky conversation starter rather than my lived experience. There were the shopping trips where she would hold up designer clothes against me and sigh about how they were wasted on someone who couldn't afford them. The dinners where she would order for me, claiming she knew what I would like, but really demonstrating that my own preferences didn't matter. The constant small corrections to my grammar, my posture, my laugh that was too loud, my voice that was too eager. Death by 1,000 cuts, each one so small I could pretend it didn't hurt. But I had been so dazzled by her friendship, so grateful for the access it provided to a life I had always dreamed of, that I accepted it all. When she forgot my birthday 3 years in a row but expected elaborate celebrations for hers, I told myself she was just busy with her important life. When she made jokes about my Goodwill wardrobe in front of her country club friends, I laughed along, pretending it was all in good fun. When she started referring to me as her project at charity galas, I convinced myself it was her awkward way of expressing affection. The wedding planning had begun 6 months earlier, when Rebecca got engaged to Michael Harrison, a hedge fund manager she had met at a wine tasting in Woodinville. The proposal had been perfect, of course, because everything in Rebecca's life had to be perfect. He had rented out the Space Needle at sunset, hired a string quartet to play her favorite songs, and presented her with a 3-carat diamond that caught the dying light like captured fire. When she called to tell me, I could hear the satisfaction in her voice, not just at being engaged, but at the Instagram-worthy perfection of it all. When she asked me to be her maid of honor, I had felt genuinely touched. Despite all the subtle digs and power plays, I had believed that underneath it all, we shared something real. I threw myself into the role with the same determination I brought to everything in my life. The same drive that had gotten me from a trailer park to a full scholarship to university to a marketing manager position at a respected firm. I created spreadsheets and mood boards, researched vendors, and negotiated prices, turning wedding planning into a second full-time job. I was good at it, too. My natural organizational skills combined with my inability to accept anything less than perfect meant that I found creative solutions to every challenge. When the florist Rebecca wanted was booked, I found another one who could recreate her vision for half the price. When the venue had a scheduling conflict, I sweet-talked them into opening on a date they usually kept closed. When the caterer tried to upcharge for dietary restrictions, I negotiated them back down while adding extra courses. Other brides in Rebecca's social circle started asking if I was a professional planner. They wanted my card, wanted to hire me for their own weddings. I was flattered but explained I was just helping a friend. They looked at me with new respect, seeing someone with talent rather than just Rebecca's charity case. I think that's when things started to shift, when Rebecca realized that her pet project was getting attention that should have been hers. The more successful I was at planning her perfect wedding, the more critical she became. Nothing was quite right. The shade of lavender for the bridesmaids' dresses was too purple or too gray. The font on the invitations was too modern or too traditional. The menu I had carefully crafted to accommodate all dietary restrictions while maintaining elegance was too safe or too adventurous. Every decision I made was wrong until she changed it. Then suddenly it was brilliant. I spent my lunch breaks calling vendors and my evenings assembling favor boxes. I used my vacation days for dress fittings and venue visits. I missed my cousin's graduation to attend a cake tasting where Rebecca rejected every option, then chose the first one we had tried. I spent money I didn't have on gas to drive all over the Puget Sound area, checking out vendors. Money Rebecca never offered to reimburse because, after all, what were friends for? The financial strain was real. While Rebecca complained about the stress of choosing between Vera Wang and Monique Lhuillier for her dress, I was calculating whether I could afford groceries if I put the bridesmaid dress on my credit card. While she debated between Maui and Santorini for the honeymoon, I was picking up extra freelance work to cover the cost of the bachelorette party she wanted in Napa. The gulf between our realities had never been starker, but I kept telling myself this was what friends did for each other. The conversation I overheard in the dressing room wasn't the first time Rebecca had revealed her true feelings about me. There had been other moments, quickly glossed over, explained away. The time she introduced me to Michael's parents as the friend I'm helping out. like I was a community service project. The dinner party, where she told the story of meeting me as if she were Jane Goodall discovering a new species of ape. The charity auction, where she joked about teaching me which fork to use, getting big laughs from people who didn't realize I was standing right there. But something about overhearing her that day, when I was literally trying on a dress I couldn't afford for a wedding I had planned for free, broke something inside me. Maybe it was the casual cruelty of it, the way she spoke about me as if I were barely human. Maybe it was the laughter of her friends, people who had smiled at me to my face while apparently mocking me behind my back. Maybe it was simply that I had finally reached my limit after 12 years of death by 1,000 cuts. The text I sent her the night before the wedding was simple and direct. I didn't elaborate on the pain she had caused or try to make her feel guilty. I simply stated that I had overheard her comments, that I would not be attending the wedding, and that I wished her well. Then I turned off my phone, took 2 sleeping pills, and went to bed, expecting to wake up to a barrage of angry messages and missed calls. Instead, I woke to silence. My phone showed no missed calls, no texts, no evidence that my absence had mattered at all. It was as if I had never existed in Rebecca's world, as if 12 years of friendship could be erased as easily as deleting a contact. I spent that Saturday, the day I should have been standing beside her at the altar, deep cleaning my apartment and sending out resumes. If Rebecca could erase me so easily, then I could erase her too. The Instagram post appeared 3 days later, shared to me by a mutual acquaintance who thought I should see it. There was Rebecca, radiant in her designer gown, surrounded by smiling bridesmaids in the lavender dresses I had chosen, claiming credit for planning every detail of her perfect wedding. The comments were full of praise and admiration, with several people offering substantial sums for her to plan their events. She had taken my work, my effort, my creativity, and claimed it as her own without a shred of shame. Something snapped inside me seeing that post. Not in a violent way, but in a clarifying one. I had spent 12 years accepting disrespect disguised as friendship. I had made myself small so Rebecca could feel big. I had accepted crumbs and been grateful for them. But I was done being grateful for crumbs. I was done being erased. For the first time in our entire relationship, I decided to stand up for myself publicly. The comment I left was professional and factual. I congratulated Rebecca on her beautiful wedding and mentioned how honored I had been to plan it as her maid of honor. I listed a few specific vendors I had negotiated with, mentioned some of the creative solutions I had implemented, and wished her well in her marriage. It was polite, gracious even, but it made it clear who had actually done the work. The comment lasted less than 10 minutes before it was deleted and I was blocked. But the damage was done. Screenshots had been taken and shared. The Seattle wedding industry is smaller than you might think, and vendors talk. The florist confirmed they had worked with me. The caterer mentioned my skill at negotiation. The venue coordinator praised my organization. Rebecca's carefully constructed narrative began to crumble. I thought that would be the end of it. A small moment of vindication before we went our separate ways forever. I underestimated how much Rebecca valued her image and how far she would go to punish anyone who threatened it. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 days later when I was heading to work. I had just gotten into my Honda Civic, a 10-year-old car that I had bought used and maintained religiously, when I noticed something off about the brakes. The pedal felt soft, spongy, wrong. My father had been a mechanic before his accident, had taught me to pay attention to my car, to notice when something wasn't right. That knowledge, passed down in grease-stained hands and patient lessons, possibly saved my life that morning. Instead of driving to work, I called Thomas at the garage I had been going to for years. He came with his tow truck, took one look under the car, and his face went pale. Someone had cut my brake line. Not worn through, not damaged by debris, but deliberately severed with what looked like a sharp blade. The cut was clean, precise, placed where it would cause maximum damage with minimum immediate detection. If I had gotten on the highway, if I had needed to stop suddenly, the results could have been catastrophic. Thomas and I stood in the parking lot, both understanding but neither wanting to voice what this meant. The police officer who responded was professional but skeptical. Without security cameras, without witnesses, there was little they could do beyond filing a report. They asked about enemies, about anyone who might wish me harm. I mentioned Rebecca, explained our falling out, but even as the words left my mouth, I could hear how they sounded. A bridesmaid disagreement escalating to attempted murder? It was like something out of a bad television movie, but I knew with bone-deep certainty that it was Rebecca. She was the only person with access to my spare key, which I had given her years ago for emergencies and never thought to ask for back. She knew my routines, knew where I parked, knew that I left for work at exactly 7:30 every morning. Most importantly, she was the only person in my life with both the motive and the complete lack of moral boundaries to do something this extreme. I changed my locks that day, all of them, even though it cost money I couldn't really spare. I started parking in different spots, varying my routes to work, checking under my car each morning before driving. I installed a security camera system that I definitely couldn't afford, and motion sensors that would alert my phone if anyone approached my windows. I began carrying pepper spray and a personal alarm. I hated living this way. Constantly vigilant, constantly afraid. But I hated the thought of being caught off guard even more. A week later, I ran into Michael at the Whole Foods in Capitol Hill. He looked exhausted, older than his 34 years, with the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from realizing you've made a terrible mistake. We stood awkwardly in the organic produce section, neither of us sure what to say. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and urgent, glancing around as if Rebecca might appear at any moment. He told me Rebecca had been different since the wedding, though looking back, he wondered if she had always been this way, and he had just been too blinded by her beauty and charm to see it. She was angry all the time now, obsessed with the damage to her reputation, spending hours tracking down everyone who had seen or shared my comment. She had hired a lawyer to explore defamation charges, had tried to get me fired from my job, had made his life miserable with her constant rage. Michael warned me to be careful, said he was genuinely worried about what Rebecca might do. He mentioned that she had been drinking more, staying out late, coming home with her eyes bright and manic, full of plans she wouldn't share. He had tried to reason with her, to point out that I had only told the truth, but that had led to such a spectacular fight that he had been sleeping in the guest room ever since. The conversation with Michael should have frightened me more than it did, but instead, it made me angry. I had spent so many years being afraid of not fitting in, afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of losing Rebecca's approval. That fear had made me accept treatment I would never tolerate from anyone else. It had made me small, had convinced me that being included was more important than being respected. I was done being afraid. I was done making myself small. The credit card fraud began 2 weeks after the brake line incident. I woke to my phone buzzing with fraud alerts. Someone had tried to open multiple credit cards in my name, had attempted to make major purchases at jewelry stores and electronics retailers. The applications had all my personal information, my social security number, my mother's maiden name, details that Rebecca knew because we had been friends for over a decade, because I had trusted her with everything. I spent entire days on the phone with credit bureaus, placing freezes and fraud alerts, documenting everything. I filed reports with the Federal Trade Commission, added to my police file, created spreadsheets tracking every incident. My life became a careful balance between living normally and building a legal case. I went to work, went to the gym, even tried to maintain some semblance of a social life. But underneath it all was the constant work of documenting Rebecca's escalating harassment. The stalking started subtly at first. A glimpse of blonde hair in my peripheral vision that would disappear when I turned. A silver Mercedes like Rebecca's parked outside my favorite coffee shop. Instagram follow requests from obviously fake accounts with generic names and no profile pictures. Messages that varied in tone from threatening to pleading to angry, sometimes all three in the same rambling paragraph. I documented everything meticulously. Screenshots, photos, dates, and times and locations. My evidence file grew thicker by the day. I invested in a good printer and made multiple copies, storing them in different locations. One copy at work, one in a safety deposit box, one with my lawyer, a friend from law school who had agreed to help me pro bono. I was building an airtight case, brick by brick, document by document. Despite everything, I tried to maintain some normalcy in my life. I had started seeing Daniel, a software engineer I had met at a book club focused on Pacific Northwest authors. He was kind and patient, with an easy laugh and a genuine interest in my thoughts and opinions. Our dates were simple, coffee shops and bookstores and walks around Green Lake, but they felt like respites from the chaos Rebecca had brought into my life. The night Rebecca appeared outside the restaurant where Daniel and I were having dinner, I knew the stalking had reached a new level. She didn't try to hide, just stood across the street in full view, watching us through the window. Her face was expressionless, her posture relaxed, as if stalking her former friend was a perfectly normal way to spend an evening. Daniel noticed my stillness, followed my gaze, and immediately understood that something was very wrong. I had told Daniel about Rebecca, about the harassment and the fear, but seeing it in person was different. He insisted on walking me to my car, on following me home, on checking my apartment before I went inside. His protective instincts were touching, but I worried about dragging him deeper into my mess. Rebecca had already proven she was willing to hurt me. I didn't want to give her another target. That night, after Daniel left, I made a decision. I couldn't keep playing defense. Couldn't keep waiting for Rebecca's next move. I needed to take control of the situation, to stop being reactive and start being proactive. The next morning, I put on my best suit, the one I had bought for important presentations, and drove to Rebecca's real estate office in Bellevue. If she wanted a confrontation, she would get one, but on my terms. The office was exactly what I expected from Rebecca, all glass and chrome and aggressive success. The receptionist recognized my name immediately, her eyes widening with the kind of interest that suggested office gossip had been active. Rebecca's corner office had glass walls, and I could see her inside, perfectly put together as always, closing what looked like a major deal. The receptionist called to announce me, and I watched Rebecca's face go through several expressions before settling on cool indifference. She made me wait, of course. Power plays were second nature to her. I sat in the uncomfortable modern chair, observing the office dynamics, the way junior agents scurried past Rebecca's office, the way even senior colleagues seemed wary of her. Success hadn't softened her edges. If anything, it had sharpened them. When she finally deigned to see me 15 minutes after I had arrived, I was ready. The woman behind the desk looked like Rebecca, but felt like a stranger. Every hair was perfectly placed, her makeup flawless despite the long day, her jewelry carefully chosen to convey wealth without ostentation. She looked at me the way someone might look at an unpleasant task they had been putting off, with a mixture of disgust and resignation. The warmth I had once imagined in her was entirely absent. Our conversation was brief but illuminating. Rebecca didn't deny anything, didn't even pretend innocence. She sat behind her massive desk, fingers steepled, and listened to my accusations with a small smile playing at her lips. When I finished, when I had laid out the break lines and the credit fraud and the stalking, she simply shrugged and asked what I expected her to do about my paranoid delusions. But then she kept talking, and that was her mistake. Rebecca always did love the sound of her own voice, loved to deliver cutting remarks and watch them land. She made comments about my background, about how people like me always tried to rise above their station and always failed. She mentioned that accidents happened all the time, that identity theft was common, that maybe I should be more careful. Each word was carefully chosen to threaten without being actionable, but she didn't know I was recording every word. I left her office with what I needed. Not a confession exactly, but close enough. Her arrogance had made her careless, and I had dozens of minutes of audio that painted a clear picture of someone with motive and means. Combined with the evidence I had been gathering, it was enough to take to the police. But first, I had one more card to play. The Seattle Real Estate Association's annual awards ceremony was 2 weeks away, and Rebecca had been nominated for Realtor of the Year. It was the crown jewel in her professional crown, the validation she craved more than anything. She had been campaigning for months, taking on high-profile listings, networking relentlessly, crafting an image of professional perfection. The award would cement her status in Seattle's competitive real estate market. I spent days crafting my letter to the ethics board. I kept it professional and factual, attaching police reports, bank records, and transcripts of our recorded conversation. I didn't editorialize or make emotional appeals. I simply presented the evidence that one of their most prominent members was engaged in criminal behavior, including fraud, stalking, and attempted murder. I sent copies to the board members, the award committee, and for good measure, a contact I had at the Seattle Times. While I waited for the various investigations to proceed, I tried to maintain some semblance of normal life. I went to work at the marketing firm where I had recently been promoted to senior manager. I continued dating Daniel, who had proven himself to be steadfast and understanding about the chaos in my life. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma, working through not just the recent events, but the 12 years of subtle abuse that had preceded them. The fire happened on a Tuesday night. I woke to the acrid smell of smoke and the piercing shriek of my smoke detector. Someone had slid a burning rope soaked in accelerant under my door, clearly intending to trap me inside. If I had been a deeper sleeper, if I had taken the sleeping pills I sometimes needed, if my apartment had been more cluttered, the outcome could have been catastrophic. As it was, I managed to extinguish the flames with my fire extinguisher, though my hands shook for hours afterward. The arson investigator who responded was thorough and grim. This wasn't a prank or a warning. This was attempted murder, premeditated and deliberate. The accelerant pattern showed someone who had researched how to make a fire spread quickly. The choice of a rope under the door suggested someone who knew my apartment layout, knew I had no other exit. Everything pointed to Rebecca. And finally, the police had enough to act. Rebecca's arrest made the evening news. The story was too sensational to ignore. Wealthy Bellevue realtor arrested for attempting to murder former friend. The details that emerged during the investigation were damning. Security footage from my bank showing her in a terrible disguise attempting to access my accounts. Text messages to friends discussing her plans for revenge. Internet search history that included queries about brake line failures, untraceable arson methods, and how to commit the perfect murder. The real estate community reacted swiftly. Rebecca's license was suspended immediately pending the outcome of her criminal trial. The Realtor of the Year award was quietly given to someone else. Her brokerage dropped her within hours of the arrest, issuing statements about their commitment to ethical behavior and their shock at her actions. One by one, every pillar of the perfect life she had built came crashing down. Michael filed for divorce before Rebecca even made bail. He had apparently been documenting his own concerns, building his own file of evidence. He told me later that he had found journals where she had written page after page about her hatred for me, detailed plans for my destruction, fantasies about what she would do if she could get away with it. The woman he had married had hidden a darkness that terrified him. Rebecca's parents, who I had met many times over the years, hired the best lawyers money could buy. They tried to paint her actions as a mental health crisis, a temporary break from reality caused by wedding stress and postpartum depression, though she wasn't pregnant. They tried to minimize the harm, to suggest that the brake lines might have been a prank gone wrong, that the fire was meant to scare, not kill. But the evidence was overwhelming. In the end, Rebecca took a plea deal, 3 to 5 years for fraud and arson, with the attempted murder charges dropped. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. She would be a convicted felon, her real estate career over, her reputation in ruins. The woman who had everything had lost it all because she couldn't stand to see someone she considered beneath her succeed on their own terms. I was in the courtroom when she was sentenced. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The designer clothes had been replaced by a simple black suit that didn't quite fit right. Her hair, usually perfect, showed roots. Her face, without its armor of expensive makeup, looked older, harder. When the judge read the sentence, she turned to look at me. For a moment, I thought I saw the girl I had met in college, scared and human. Then her lawyer whispered something and the mask slipped back on. The aftermath was strange. Life went on, but everything felt different. I moved to a better apartment in Queen Anne, one with multiple exits and a doorman. The insurance settlement from the fire, combined with my promotion, meant I could afford somewhere nicer. I continued therapy, working through the trauma and the deeper issues that had made me accept toxic friendship for so long. I learned about boundaries, about self-worth that didn't depend on external validation. My relationship with Daniel deepened slowly but surely. He had seen me at my worst, had stuck around through the chaos and the fear. had never once suggested that any of it was my fault. We took things slow, both of us cautious about trust, but what we built was solid. He made me laugh, challenged me intellectually, and most importantly, he saw me as an equal, not a project or a charity case. 6 months after the trial, I ran into one of Rebecca's former bridesmaids at Pike Place Market. Sarah approached hesitantly, as if I might reject her. We ended up having coffee, then lunch, then a 3-hour conversation about our experiences with Rebecca. She told me about subtle cruelties I hadn't seen, about the way Rebecca had played her friends against each other, about the relief she felt when it all came crashing down. We became friends, real friends, bonding over shared trauma and mutual healing. A year after the trial, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I started my own business. Phoenix Event Planning, specializing in weddings and corporate events. It turned out that all those skills I had developed planning Rebecca's wedding were marketable. Clients appreciated my attention to detail, my ability to negotiate with vendors, my talent for creating beautiful events on any budget. The business grew slowly but steadily, built on word of mouth and genuine satisfaction. I named it Phoenix for obvious reasons. I had risen from the ashes of my old life, had transformed destruction into creation. Every successful event felt like a small victory, proof that Rebecca hadn't destroyed my love for the work, just my willingness to do it for free. I hired assistants who I paid fairly, created a work environment based on respect and collaboration, everything Rebecca's world had lacked. 2 years after the trial, I received a letter forwarded by my lawyer. Rebecca had written from prison, pages and pages of rambling text that veered between apology and accusation. She was sorry, but I had made her do it. She missed our friendship, but I had betrayed her. She wanted to make amends, but I needed to admit my fault. I read it once, then filed it away. Some chapters of your life deserve to stay closed. Daniel proposed on a hiking trip to Mount Rainier on a perfect September day when the mountain was out and the wildflowers were in bloom. It wasn't elaborate or Instagram-worthy. He simply turned to me at a viewpoint, pulled out a simple solitaire ring that he had chosen because he knew I valued practicality over ostentation, and asked if I would marry him. I said yes without hesitation, knowing I had found someone who loved me for exactly who I was. Our wedding was everything Rebecca's wasn't. Small, intimate, filled with people who genuinely loved us. I planned it myself, of course, but this time with joy rather than obligation. We had it at a small venue on Vashon Island, with wildflowers and local food and a playlist we created together. My mother walked me down the aisle, crying happy tears. Daniel's vows made me laugh and cry in equal measure. It was perfect because it was ours. I thought about Rebecca that day, not with anger or sadness, but with something approaching pity. She had possessed every advantage in life: beauty, wealth, intelligence, charisma, and had squandered them all on pride and cruelty. She had mistaken fear for respect, had believed that power came from making others feel small. She had never understood that real strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. 3 years after the trial, news of Rebecca's release came quietly. She had served her time, been a model prisoner apparently, had even led yoga classes for other inmates. She couldn't return to real estate, couldn't reclaim her old life in Seattle. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved to Arizona, was trying to start over as a life coach of all things. The irony wasn't lost on me. Rebecca giving advice on how to live well was like an arsonist teaching fire safety. Sometimes I wondered what prison had been like for her. Had she been afraid, the way she had made me afraid? Had she felt powerless, the way she had tried to make me feel? Had she experienced the kind of systematic dehumanization she had subjected me to for 12 years? I hoped she had learned something from it, had developed some capacity for empathy or self-reflection. But knowing Rebecca, she had probably just learned to hide her true nature better. My business continued to grow. I hired more staff, expanded to corporate events, even published a wedding planning guide that became a local bestseller. Success was sweeter because I had earned it myself, without connections or handouts or anyone's approval. When clients complimented my work, I accepted their praise without deflection. When vendors tried to overcharge, I negotiated firmly without apology. I had found my voice, and I used it. 5 years after the trial, I was invited to speak at a women's entrepreneurship conference about building a business from trauma. I told my story, the real story, without sugarcoating or false forgiveness. I talked about recognizing toxic relationships, about the slow erosion of self-worth, about the courage it takes to say enough. The response was overwhelming. Woman after woman approached me afterward with their own stories of toxic friendships, of relationships that diminished rather than elevated. That's when I realized that my story wasn't unique. Rebecca wasn't some aberration, but an extreme example of dynamics that play out in relationships everywhere. The friend who only calls when they need something. The colleague who takes credit for your ideas. The family member who makes you feel small. We've all known someone who made us question our worth, who made us feel grateful for scraps of approval. The difference is in how we respond. I started incorporating this message into my business, creating workshops on professional boundaries, on recognizing your worth, on building genuine relationships. It wasn't therapy. I was careful about that. But it was healing in its own way. Every woman who left my workshop standing a little taller, speaking a little louder, valuing herself a little more, felt like a small victory against the Rebeccas of the world. Daniel and I bought a house in Ballard, a charming craftsman that needed work but had good bones. We spent weekends refinishing floors and painting walls, creating a home together. I planted a garden, remembering the lessons my mother had taught me about making things grow. There was something healing about putting down roots, about creating something permanent after years of feeling temporary in Rebecca's world. Sometimes, when I was working in the garden or planning a particularly challenging event, I would think about the girl I had been. The one who had been so desperate to leave her past behind that she had been willing to erase herself. I wanted to tell her that there was nothing wrong with where she came from, that growth didn't require denial, that she was enough exactly as she was. But we can't change our past. We can only learn from it. The last time I heard about Rebecca was through LinkedIn. She had started a new business in Scottsdale, motivational speaking and life coaching focused on women's empowerment. Her profile photo showed the same polished exterior, the same perfect smile. Her bio talked about overcoming adversity, about learning from mistakes, about helping other women reach their full potential. There was no mention of her criminal record, no hint of accountability. Part of me wanted to warn her potential clients, to expose the hypocrisy of a convicted felon who had tried to murder her best friend, now preaching about women supporting women. But I didn't. Rebecca had taught me many things, and one of them was that the truth has a way of revealing itself. Her new victims would learn who she really was eventually. My job was to focus on my own life, my own growth, my own happiness. I kept one photo from our friendship, tucked away in a drawer rather than displayed. It was from our sophomore year of college, taken at a protest for higher education funding. We stood side by side, holding handmade signs, looking young and idealistic, and genuinely united in purpose. That was before the poison crept in, before the power dynamics solidified, before she decided I was beneath her. I kept it as a reminder that even the most toxic relationships often begin with real connection. My story doesn't have a neat ending because life doesn't work that way. Rebecca is out there somewhere, probably charming new victims, definitely refusing to take responsibility for her actions. I'm here, building a life of meaning and connection with people who see my worth. The scars from those months of terror have faded but not disappeared. I still check my locks, still vary my routines, still feel a spike of fear when I see a blonde woman who walks like her. But mostly I feel grateful. Grateful that I survived, that I found my voice, that I learned to value myself. Grateful for Daniel, for real friends, for work that fulfills me. Grateful even for the experience, as painful as it was, because it taught me lessons I might never have learned otherwise. About strength and resilience, about the importance of boundaries, about the difference between being nice and being kind, about the power of standing up for yourself, even when it's terrifying. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my younger self, who is accepting treatment they know they don't deserve because they're grateful for any inclusion at all, I want you to know that you deserve better. Your background doesn't determine your worth. Your bank account doesn't define your value. Anyone who makes you feel small is showing you who they are, not who you are. Listen to them, believe them, and then walk away. To anyone who sees themselves in Rebecca, who uses their privilege as a weapon, who builds themselves up by tearing others down, I have something to say to you too. The power you think you have is an illusion. The people you diminish have lives and worth beyond your comprehension. The superiority you feel is a prison you've built for yourself. There's still time to change, to choose connection over control, to build rather than destroy. The question is whether you're brave enough to try. This story began with a friendship and ended with a conviction, but that's not really where it ends. It continues every day in the choices I make, the boundaries I maintain, the life I build with intention and purpose. It continues in the faces of brides whose special days I help create, in the love of a husband who sees me clearly, in friendships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. It continues in the strength I found when someone tried to break me and the grace I'm still learning to extend to myself. Rebecca took years from me, but she also gave me something invaluable, though she never intended to. She taught me that I could survive anything. She showed me that my worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. She forced me to find my voice, set my boundaries, claim my space in the world. These were lessons I might have learned more gently elsewhere, but I learned them thoroughly, and they have served me well. So this is my story, told in full for the first time. A story of friendship and betrayal, of cruelty and resilience, of falling and rising. It's not a fairy tale with a happy ending tied up in a bow. It's a real story about real people making real choices and living with real consequences. It's a story about learning to value yourself when someone else is determined to convince you you're worthless. It's a story I own completely. Every painful moment and every hard-won triumph. In the end, that ownership is everything. Rebecca tried to erase me, first from her life, then from the world entirely. But I'm still here, still standing, still growing. I've built a life filled with love and purpose and joy. I've surrounded myself with people who lift me up rather than tear me down. I've learned to use my voice without apology, to take up space without shame, to exist without needing anyone's permission. The farm girl from Yakima that Rebecca mocked, she's still part of me. She's in my work ethic, my resilience, my ability to grow beautiful things from difficult soil. The difference is that now I'm proud of her. I'm proud of where I came from and how far I've come. I'm proud of surviving what someone else thought would destroy me. That pride, that unshakable knowledge of my own worth, is the greatest victory of all. And unlike everything Rebecca tried to take from me, it's something no one can ever steal.